Hey everybody, welcome back to Being the Marshmallow, Living and Coping with PTSD. I am Bob Wagner. It is still the same day as the overstimulation video was filmed. I'm trying to do a couple of videos back to back in order to kind of clear some space on the workbench metaphorically to make room for a video that I want to do on the Tuesday immediately before Thanksgiving of 2016 that is going to cover an extremely important and extremely serious subject that is very, very relevant to the mentally ill community, particularly around the holidays. Right now what I want to discuss is I want to discuss the tug of war and the balancing act that is perpetual and ongoing between social mores and the need for self-care. Okay, everybody has this, neurotypical or mentally ill, everybody has this kind of balancing act where on the one hand you don't want to be perceived as too much of a social outcast or being selfish or only thinking of yourself, but on the other hand you don't want to neglect the things that you need to be physically and psychologically healthy. And it's a much more severe problem among the mentally ill because we already have kind of a problem fitting into society, and we work very, very hard at doing so. And our need for self-care is much greater because we have this very serious psychological and medical and physical medical issue that if we neglect it, it can kill us. Okay? We can wind up dead or in a secure psych ward if we don't practice self-care. At the same time, if we don't, pay a certain amount of respect to social mores, excuse me, an itchy spot on the back of my knee there. At the same time, if we don't pay a certain amount of respect to social convention and the social mores, we may find ourselves without friends, without family who wants to speak to us, without a job, which, if you've ever had food, it's tasty stuff, it's, kind of need a job to have any more of it. So we need to find that. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that, well, yeah, sure, it's like, we don't want to be perceived as, well, that's the mentally ill person. That's the big thing is, very often we will deny ourselves self-care and deny ourselves permission to practice self-care in a social setting because we don't want to be perceived as the weirdo or the freak, or we don't want to draw attention to our medical condition, and we don't want to be perceived as the depression person or the PTSD person or all this yickety-yackety. And you know what? Screw it, okay? Just screw it. What you're doing there is you are setting the stage for a much bigger problem, all right? By refusing to allow yourself the things that you need to be well in a perfectly reasonable desire to be better socially integrated, you are setting things up to potentially be perceived as even more outside of the social norm than you might be if you simply said, hey, you know what, this is what I need. What can we do to make sure that I have it? Okay, I'm going to give you a perfect example of that. I work retail. I love what I do for a living, and I love the company that I work for, and I have some amazing coworkers and a great boss who is awesome. And with the holiday season fast approaching, we are getting really close to the big Christmas shopping push here in America, and so there was a meeting between my store and several other stores in my district for all of the staff members of the company to get together and discuss what the expectations were going to be specifically for Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and what the expectations were going to be during the Christmas season, and then what people who hadn't been with the company for the post-Christmas season, what they should expect. And we get to the meeting place, and it was at this food court not too far from my store, and the manager who had set it up, they did an amazing job. There was pizza and cupcakes and soda and snacks and little door prizes for everybody. It was really great. She did a brilliant job of it. Problem was that the table was this open table, okay? Big long table created by pushing 3 or 4 or 5 littler tables together, and there was no space. There was no place at the table where I could sit with my back to a wall. If you have PTSD, if you have a trauma condition or an anxiety condition, you know full well how important this is to be able to sit with your back to a wall. And if you're neurotypical and you have somebody in your life who has one of these conditions, then you also know what I'm talking about. We will very typically not be willing to sit in movie theaters or restaurants or other social venues where we can't have our back to a wall. And if we simply can't, we get very, very twitchy, and we're always, checking our six. And some of you are nodding going, yep, I've seen that or I've done that. And so I wasn't able to do this, and I spotted this from like 15, 20 feet away. I'm like, man, this is going to be a problem, man. But I'm like, okay, just, sit down. This is your first big multi-store meeting. Be part of the group. And I sat down, and I immediately started getting twitchy, and I was checking my six more than I was paying attention to what was going on. And I spotted a place about 6 feet away where I could sit with my back to a wall, and I could hear perfectly everything that was being said and be participating quite happily in what was going on. The problem is it was physically removed from the main table. And I'm like, okay, if I go and sit over there, this is going to create a problem because, what are people going to think? And you know what? That is one of the nastiest, most poisonous sentences in any language. What will people think? And it's really not a seed that you want to plant or nurture too much. And I went nice. I'm like, you know what? I need this. This is something that I need. And I did the right thing. I gave myself permission to practice self-care by getting up from my seat and sitting over at this other spot. And I don't think I was sitting there for a whole minute before the social convention monkey started in my ear about how, well, people are going to think you're a snob, you're not making an effort to fit in, you are letting the disease win by doing this, what are people thinking, you're being perceived as standoffish, etc., 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 and you are socially ostracizing yourself from the larger group. You really need to go and sit down and join the larger group and just suck it up, buttercup. And boy, did that prove to be a mistake. Without getting into too graphic a detail, I wound up having a major, major panic episode after maybe a minute having sat back down at this spot. I got overwhelmed, I had a panic episode, and I wound up having to leave the meeting. Not because I had said anything professionally discourteous to any of my coworkers, not because I had put hands on anybody, but simply because by not allowing myself to do something that I knew from vast past personal experience I needed in order to maintain my physical and emotional equilibrium, because I was more concerned about what people were going to think, I wound up doing myself real harm. I mean, I didn't physically injure myself, but make no mistake, if you've never had a panic attack, there is a physical element to it. And instead of just, sitting there and participating in the meeting at, a 6-foot remove, I wound up having to leave the meeting early, drawing a massive amount of attention to myself, and wound up having to take about a 45-minute, hour and a half ride home on public transit during this time of public unrest that we're experiencing here in the United States in an extremely elevated state. Whereas if I had simply said, okay, you know what, I'm going to sit here with my back to a wall, maybe people will have some questions, but hey, who cares? And it would have worked out much, much better. So by not practicing self-care in an attempt to serve social convention, you could very easily be setting the stage for a much bigger problem. And by trying to avoid a problem, you may in fact be crafting one. Now, obviously, we don't want to be selfish, and we don't want to draw too much attention to ourselves, and we don't want everything to be seen by our peers, whether they be personal or professional, through the filter of mental illness. Oh my gosh, they're talking a lot. They must be in a manic state. They're being very quiet. What are they plotting? Are they deciding our fates? Things like that. Everything you do becomes seen through that, and we don't want that. We don't want our peers to decide that our core identity is that of a mentally ill person, because none of us are that first and foremost, okay? That is not our core identity any more than an epileptic person's proclivity for seizures is their core identity, okay? Julius Caesar was an epileptic. People don't remember him for having seizures. They remember him for being one of the most well-known emperors of Roman times. That was his core identity. My core identity is that of a husband and a friend and an advocate for mental health rights. If you'll pardon my saying so, a damned good retail professional. I am one hell of a customer service pro. If you've ever been in my store, I will roll out the red carpet for you, my friend, and you will walk out of there feeling like royalty, I guarantee it. That's my core identity. Giant sci-fi nerd. Look, Chewbacca's autograph, can't see it there. Oop, wrong shoulder. There you go. That's my core identity. This big giant flaming nerd who got married at a science fiction convention, not the disease. It's not your core identity. The disease isn't your core identity. So I get it. You know, we want to fit in as much as possible, and we want to be perceived as these other things that are not the disease. But we also need to take care of ourselves. And you can very politely and very respectfully and very discreetly make requests for the things that you need. You can ask for the seat with your back to a wall. You can request, if you have touch issues or physical proximity issues, that people not be within a certain distance of you. You say, excuse me, you're kind of crowding me. Could you take a step back? At times in my professional life, I've had people putting hands on me, strangers putting hands on me. I'm a sexual assault survivor and a physical abuse survivor. I've been raped many, many times by my father, and I got the shit beat out of me by him growing up as a kid. Consequently, I don't like people I don't know touching me very much, and frankly, often I don't like people who I do know touching me too much. And it's perfectly acceptable if you have been through that, and a lot of people with PTSD have touch issues and proximity issues, to say, excuse me, but could you please take a step back? Or could you please refrain from putting your hands on me? You don't have to get up in somebody's face. You don't have to yell about it. You don't have to be, create a disturbance. Just say, excuse me, could you please do this or not do this? And yeah, it will draw a little bit of attention to you. So what? You may be perceived as being a bit eccentric, a bit peculiar. Who cares? Okay? The story I just told. Perfect example. Okay? On the one hand, if I'd sat there with my back to a wall, people would be like, well, why is Bob sitting over there instead of with us? What's going on? Does he not like us? Whatever. Instead, I have a full-bore panic attack, and I was the talk of the company for 3 days. And it made a manageable situation much bigger than it needed to be. So a couple of things that you can do, because this is starting to run towards the 15-minute mark, and I've been working on this video for an hour now. Try to read your environment, your social and your professional environment, and kind of pinpoint different different potential triggers. Figure out what you're going to need to deal with them, and find ways to politely request or to politely claim the things that you need in order to be well. Because, yeah, you may be perceived as a bit peculiar, a bit eccentric, but by not asking for these things, you could hurt yourself. You could wind up doing something that costs you your job. You may wind up doing something that could cost you a friend or a family member's association with you. You could do something that winds up driving you to suicide, and we don't want that, especially now with Christmas coming around. Nobody wants 2016 to be the Christmas daddy's not coming home because he ate a gun. Practice your self-care, and don't be ashamed to ask for the things that you need. If you had cancer, or if you were an epileptic, or you were like my friend who's the diabetic, there would be no shame in saying, excuse me, but I need the following things, okay? People with celiac disease aren't ashamed to ask for gluten-free menu options. Big deal. It's the same thing. And I understand that we want to fly under the radar, and we don't want to be perceived as a weirdo and a freak, because there's a very medieval attitude towards mental illness. But it's necessary to take care of yourself, or you will be creating a much, much bigger problem. It's like if you have a firecracker, okay? You can have a firecracker sitting in your hand, and if it goes off and your hand's open like this, it's going to sting a little bit, right? But if you clench your fist, you're going to blow off your fingers. By not requesting the things that you need to engage in good self-care practices, you are clenching your fist and you're going to blow your fingers off. Whereas, by saying, hey, excuse me, can I have that seat with my back to the wall, or would you please refrain from touching me? It's sitting there in his hand, pow, it goes off and it stings a little bit, but hey, who cares? No harm, no foul, no lasting damage. So that is the message for this video. Read your environment, get an idea of the things that you need to feel physically and emotionally safe, and give yourself permission to politely request them, and do so in a discreet fashion. You know, just very politely, excuse me, may I please? Please goes a long way in society. And if people look at you a little bit differently, screw them! Okay? You're not here to be perceived as normal. You're not here to have the approval of other people. You're here to live as happy and healthy a life as possible. And if somebody thinks that you're a bit different and a bit odd, well, you know what? I don't know about you guys, but personally, I'd rather be alive and have people think I'm a little bit peculiar than have them think that I'm normal right up until the moment where they find out that I went out to some discreet location and stuck a loaded pistol in my mouth and blew the back of my head off, which happens 26 times a day in this country, 28 times a day in this country. I would rather be a live eccentric than a dead normal person any day of the week. And that's what we've got to look at. Be well, be safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.